everyone, and hope you're doing great this wonderful last Tuesday of February 2025. Wow, just like that. 4 Tuesdays have gone. Today is Tuesday, February 25, 2025. 25. Very interesting. Have you been? Have your families, your organizations, your team, your institutions, and of course, your nations been? I'm personally very excited to be with you this last Tuesday of February. And today, like I said last week, we'll be going to a different sub-theme on developing national innovation systems for absorptive capacity. I repeat, today we'll be going to a different sub-theme of developing national innovation systems for absorptive capacity. Today, we'll be looking at understanding innovation drivers within economies. Understanding innovation drivers within economies with a subtitle, the monitoring and evaluation imperative. I repeat, today we'll be looking at understanding innovation drivers within economies with a sub-theme, the monitoring and evaluation imperative. Now, remember something, the whole of this program has been segmented into two, and we've been saying this from the beginning. There is the National Innovation Systems, which we spent the first 3-4 weeks talking about, developing national innovation systems. And there's the latter part of the program, which is the absorptive capacity. We are not developing national innovation systems for the sake of national innovation systems, but to an end that we attain absorptive capacity, right? And absorptive capacity, of course, is the ability to not just acquire knowledge, but to use knowledge for economic and social advancement. Extremely important. So the ability to generate knowledge is not just what this program is about, but the ability to apply the knowledge to the end that there is economic and social progress in the nation and the economy. Extremely important. Now, that latter part is what we have spent the last couple of weeks more on, looking at ensuring that there is that economic advancement and social development as a result of the national innovation systems. But how do we recognize what exactly it is that is driving not just national innovation, but ensuring the attainment of that absorptive capacity? That's why we need monitoring and evaluation. There is a monitoring and evaluation imperative that will enable us to understand the real innovation drivers within the economies. Remember, like we said about 4 or 5 weeks ago, when you are innovating, it's a process of trying and retrying, testing and retesting. As a matter of fact, at a point, you even pilot before you talk about scaling. In other words, you are largely experimenting, right? Until you kind of perfect the product and then you begin to scale, right? Extremely important. But exactly I want you to imagine innovation as an innovation. Permit my tautology. When you are innovating with your innovation system, in other words, when you are creating your national innovation system, you are designing, right? Innovating is about creating. It's never existed before. You are conceptualizing, you are imagining, right? And when you do all that, you begin to test it. That's the piloting. Imagine you are innovating with your innovation system, right? So you have created a national innovation system. Last week, we talked about, for instance, building a national innovation strategy on cost optimization as an example of what you could choose to do. We also gave the example of, for instance, synchronizing your entertainment content with the possibility of creating digital platforms. For instance, a nation like Nigeria that is rich in entertainment content, and you decide that one of your national innovation strategies will be to synchronize your rich entertainment content with strong technology platforms so that you can optimize your earnings, like platforms like Netflix, who do not necessarily generate the content, but still have, I think, over $400 billion, which is more than Nigeria's current GDP, like we said last week, right? So let's imagine that you want to test those two things. Those are like hypotheses. You've not proven it yet, but you want to test it. You are hypothesizing that, for instance, if we compete on cost optimization, if we are India, or if we compete on synchronizing our entertainment content with our technology platforms, if we're Nigeria, if we compete that way, we are likely to attain not just a strong innovation system, but the absorptive capacity, which would translate into economic and social development. If that's your hypothesis, you then begin to test strong. But how exactly do you identify whether or not it has been effective in the absence of monitoring and evaluation? That's number one. Number two, even if it has been effective. Remember, we talked about innovation as coordination. In other words, there are several elements that make up innovation. There is definitely education. There is definitely research and development. Even within research and development, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we talked about the research and development that is largely university-based, but there's also the research and development that is industry-based, because those who are working in the academia will typically hypothesize but not test. They will come up with new ideas, but largely it is the industry labs, in other words, the laboratories in the market, that will test, because they tend to interact more with the market. Then they can give the feedback to those who are in the academia. In other words, there is a lot of coordination. Of course, there is the advertising, the commercialization of innovation, extremely important, and that's where the scaling comes in. So there are so many elements. How do you know which of those elements have actually enabled your absorptive capacity most significantly? Extremely important. So without monitoring and evaluation, you may not know, one, if your hypothesis is working, how you have conceptualize your innovation system, or the assumptions upon which you have predicated your innovation system, right? You won't know if it's working, number one. Number two, even if it's working, you may not know exactly which of the different innovation elements. Remember, a system is made up of several interconnected parts. We emphasized a lot in the first and second episodes or so. Right? A system, it's a national innovation system because there are several parts. There's the education, there's industry, there is even sometimes the foreign relations aspect, especially if you're exporting, right? A lot of things come together to make your national innovation system. However, you need to identify exactly which of those is contributing most significantly to your national innovation output, outcomes, and impact. Extremely important. And that is where the monitoring and evaluation imperative comes in. So we are looking at understanding innovation drivers within economies, right? With the rider, the monitoring and evaluation imperative. You need to know which of your innovation outputs are most responsible for your desirable innovation. You need to know which of your innovation inputs, beg your pardon, are most responsible for your innovation outputs, outcomes, and impact. This is Tolo Modara on Amalgam Radio Communications. The program is developing national innovation systems for absorptive capacity. And today we are looking at understanding innovation drivers within economies with a focus on the monitoring and evaluation imperative. And we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. I hope you are enjoying the program as much as I am. So let's look at an example of what a particular nation has done in terms of creating a monitoring and evaluation framework for their national innovation systems. Today, we are going to take a journey to Europe, particularly the nation of Portugal. Come along with me on this ride. Let's look at what we can learn from them, and then let's look at how we can apply it to how different nations can apply it to different contexts, right? So in Portugal, they recognized that, of course, there was a strong appreciation that they recognize of the role of developing a national innovation system, right? So like we as advocating passionately on this program, they also knew that the national system of innovation is very critical to the development of a nation, right? That was not in doubt for them. They recognized that a national innovation system leads to the likelihood of increased availability of all kinds of supports within an economy that will stimulate the economy, grow the GDP, grow even the GDP per capita, and so on and so forth, right? And so that was not in doubt at all. But one of the things that they did was to also measure the effectiveness of whatever innovation strategies they were deploying, right? Extremely important. So they decided to work with some of an existing framework. Now, I'm still going to talk about how, remember I said we can learn from this, adapt, or even recreate. So I'm not saying that we should take their framework, hook, line, and sinker, because they are different contexts, right? But the fact that they have a framework for measuring what they're doing with the national innovation system is what I think some other nations should learn from. If you have one already, strengthen it. If you don't have one, create a monitoring and evaluation framework for your national innovation systems and strategies. Very, very important, right? So they decided to, amongst what they worked with was the Global Innovation Index. There is a framework already that is called the GII, the Global Innovation System, the Global Innovation Index. Now, what this Global Innovation Index does is that it creates an input and output comparison, which I really like, extremely important. So the Global Innovation Index is a framework that has two subsets, so to say. There's the input subset and there's the output subset. The input subset consists of 5 pillars, while the output subset consists of 2 pillars, right? So the Global Innovation System, Global Innovation Index, I wonder why I keep calling it system. The Global Innovation Index, beg your pardon, consists of the input and the output section. Now, the input section has 5 pillars that this index concluded are critical to enabling innovation. So whatever they call an input is supposed to enable innovation, and whatever they call an output is supposed to be the results of the enablement, right? Having enabled innovation, we are supposed to have the result of that enablement. So the first of the 5 inputs is one, institutions, right? It's interesting because if you know us in Amogate, we are very passionate about institutions. Institutions are like pillars, right? I remember doing a program, I think it was succession management and institution building. I did another one, leadership development and institution building, and I spoke extensively through research, through evidence. I spoke extensively on the need to have institutions even for efficiency. Institutions do not need to crowd out efficiency. Institutions actually enable efficiency. Institutions are like pillars, right? And without pillars, you can't fly. You can't soar. I remember giving the example of trying to fly on 3 trying to fly on 3 wheels. I said, you try racing on 3 wheels. You would need the 4 tires of your car to have the stability to attain speed. So it was interesting to see that the first pillar, the very first pillar of the input section is institutions. And they gave 3 sub-elements of these institutions: the political environment, the regulatory environment. My colleague, Dr. Tisila Ogunshono, was talking about the role of regulation in SMEs development and the subsequent contributions of SMEs in such environments where you have stable regulation to economic growth, jobs creation, and so on and so forth. So even for this Global Innovation Index, not just one, the very first input identified is institutions, and it consists of the political environment, the regulatory environment, and the business environment. The second pillar identified is human capital and research. Of course, we've been talking a lot about education. Last week, we talked about the talent management imperative. In fact, also 2 weeks ago, we started 2 weeks ago and ended last week. We said very strongly last week that if you are going to have a national innovation system, you must ask, especially a strategy part of it, you must ask yourself, what are the talent management needs to drive that strategy? Right? We gave the example, for instance, that if the intentional development of a cost-efficient innovation, especially technology and innovation environment, is what you want to compete with in these days of open innovation, then you must ask yourself, what are the mix of skills, the multidisciplinary orientation you need that will enable you, create such an environment, such a cost-efficient open innovation environment for you to compete as a nation. Extremely important, right? 2 weeks ago, we talked about talent management strategies for national innovation systems, and last week we zoomed in further on it. Last week we said we are going to need talent management strategies for national innovation with deliberate focus on gender inclusivity. Very, very important. We also said that your national innovation vision will determine your talent management strategy for that national innovation, because of course, you have to know how you want to compete as a nation, what you want to be, what are your comparative strengths, and how do you want to compete with those comparative strengths before you can develop a corresponding talent management strategy for your national innovation vision. Extremely important. So that's their second pillar. Again, don't forget, we're looking at the GII, the Global Innovation Index. This is a monitoring and evaluation framework that Portugal decided to use in some way, right? So the institutions are the first of the input pillars, and it consists of political environment, regulatory environment, and business environment. The second pillar is the human capital and research, right? Extremely important. Of course, within the human capital and research inputs are 3 sub-elements. 1, education. general education. I've talked a lot about science at the elementary and high school level, extremely important. I've talked a lot about the need to compel the learning of science, right? I give the example of a nation like Nigeria, where after the first 3 years of high school or secondary school, the child is asked to choose between science and art. And I said, no, we should combine that to lay the foundation for surplus human capital that can, first of all, do science, to also have a multidisciplinary orientation for many problems today that would actually require that ability to synergize the sciences and arts and economics for us to be able to resolve such problems, right? So the human capital and research input is made up of the first sub-element, which is education. Then the second element is tertiary education. Again, if you look at the earlier episodes of this program, if you go on the YouTube page, Amoge Radio Communications on YouTube, you will see episodes 1 to episode 7. This is the 8th episode. So from the beginning of January till now, we've had 7 previous episodes before this one. You will see us talk about the role of graduate education, the role of research at the higher level, of course, the role of basic tertiary education, which is a bachelor's or the first degree, like some nations call it, right? So this human capital and research input is made up of those 3 elements, one being education, the second being tertiary education, and the third being research and development, which is not tied to the tertiary education, like we've already given a hint. It's both in academia and also in the industry. And as a matter of fact, like we alluded to at the beginning of this episode, you actually need both academia and industry to collaborate in research and development to ensure that the ideas that tend to be developed more with the academia is tested effectively through the industry labs, because they interact more with the market. Very important. So that's the second pillar. Now, the third pillar, still in the input section of this GII. Remember, we're looking at the Global Innovation Index. The third pillar is the market sophistication. Market sophistication, it's an input, right? The third pillar is the infrastructure, beg your pardon. Then the fourth pillar is the market of sophistication. But it's interesting to note that market sophistication is actually an input. The level of sophisticatedness of your market would determine how much your innovation is likely to produce, your innovation efforts, your innovation systems and strategy is likely to translate into absorptive capacity, which are the economic and social development outcomes that you're expecting. So the infrastructure inputs, the third input of infrastructure is broken into one, ICT, that's information, communication, and technology sub-input. Then there's general infrastructure. They also have the ecological sustainability for the GIA. Now, as a nation, like I said, it's not about copying and pasting. It's about thinking in terms of frameworks and asking yourself, what do we need to be our core input? Now, the fourth one, like I said earlier, is market sophistication. Again, my colleague, Dr. Lucian, has been speaking a lot about the need for this. The first one is credits, which she has been speaking a lot about on her program, which runs every Friday on a call. She talks about economic issues largely. Recently, she has been looking at SME growth. Who are those that test innovation sometimes? Who are those that create? I want you to imagine Facebook 20 years ago, not the Facebook you know today. It was not a well-established organization. It was likely to be an SME. I want you to imagine Apple 35 years ago. And I can go on and on and on. So if we don't have the market sophistication, innovation may not translate into economic output, right? We may not have that absorptive capacity because there's no environment for them to test the ideas. There's no support. Credit is the first. You would have thought a GII, you would have thought a Global Innovation Index will be all about the sciences. But I told you are going to require a multidisciplinary orientation. There are several factors that need to come together for us to not just have innovation for the sake of creation, but true innovation which encompasses economic outputs. Can you imagine that market sophistication is actually an input? If your market is not sophisticated enough to, one, provide credits, that's the first sub element. Then number two, stimulate investment. That's the second element of this fourth input, investment. And number three, trade, competition, and market scale. In other words, if your market is not sophisticated enough to attain a certain level of scale, you may invest in creativity, but you may not have optimal innovation outcomes. That's just the way it is. Extremely important. Innovation is the whole gamut. I remember in one of the earliest episodes, I made a distinction between creativity and innovation. Innovation is the whole concept, is the whole framework, right? It is the whole cycle, all the way from conceptualization to commercialization. I repeat, innovation is the whole cycle, all the way from conceptualization, all the way to commercialization. If you are creating and you're not commercializing, not to talk of scaling, then you don't have innovation. You don't have true innovation. So the third element is trade, competition, and market scale. Is your market capable of scaling? Are you working with economists within your global innovation orientation, where you want to ensure that your nation is competing? Are you working with economists to ensure that whatever ideas the SMEs are birthing is capable of being grown to a level where it attains sufficient scale in the market? Because again, you need to understand that the optimization, right, that we've been talking about, where you gain maximum benefits from your innovation input, often comes at a level of scale. That's where you have economists to talk about economies of scale, where the higher the output, the more will be the profit, because you already have sunk cost. This is not an economic class, but let me quickly explain. You can join my colleague, Dr. Vision, on Friday for that. Sunk costs are certain costs. They're like certain costs that, regardless of how much you produce, they don't change, right? So if, for instance, you build a house and you built a house already, and the house has the capacity, for instance, to accommodate 100 guests, I'm just using as an example, and you make money off the guests, right? But there's a certain amount you pay in rent or in mortgage every month. Whether or not you have 100 guests or you have 20 guests, it's a sunk cost. So for you to optimize that investment, you have to drive scale. You have to try to ensure you have as many as 100 guests, because that sunk cost is not changing. That's why we need scale, market scale. There are certain sunk costs you have made as a nation into your national innovation system. Education may be a sunk cost. The physical infrastructure may be a sunk cost, right? And so on and so forth. And so if you also do not invest in ensuring that this third sub-element of market subscription is there, which is trade, competitiveness, and market scale, you may not attain optimal innovation. You may not be able to turn your innovation into optimal economic and social development without ensuring that you are properly scaling your market. These are all different conversations, and I'll encourage you to please join us Monday through Friday. Many times, several of the things we share on Hamburger Trader Communications are connected. They are directed towards national, institutional, organization, and of course, team and individual building. Very, 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 very important. Let me go to the fourth mega panel, the fifth element. Remember, we've looked at the first four. This Global Innovation Index has 6 elements, right? The first 4 are the inputs, is the input index, and the second, or this input sub-index of the Global Innovation Index. The first 4 are the input sub-index, and the last 2 are the output sub-index. So the output sub-index consists of 2 elements: the knowledge and technology outputs. So now that we've invested in institutions, now that we've invested in human capital and research, now that we've invested in infrastructure, now that we've invested in market sophistication, and also business sophistication, by the way, that's the fifth of the 5 sub elements, or the 5 elements of the input sub index. That's the business sophistication. But I'll go quickly to the output sub-index for the sake of time. What is it now translating into in terms of knowledge and technology transfer, knowledge and technology output, as well as creative output? Knowledge and technology output as well as creative output. Under that, the knowledge and technology output includes the knowledge creation, knowledge impact, and knowledge diffusion. I repeat, the knowledge and technology output includes knowledge creation, knowledge impact, and knowledge diffusion. And then the creative output includes intangible assets, creative goods and services. Very important. When you see the Facebook, when you see the iPhone, when you see the DeepSeek, when you see all kinds of outputs coming from innovation, it is because these inputs have been made, and those are the creative goods and services, which is a sub-element of the creative output of the output sub-index. Now, for those who may want to know, the fifth element of the input sub-index is business sophistication. It includes knowledge workers, people like Amogies, like KPMG, like McKinsey. The knowledge workers are a critical part. This is Global Innovation Index saying part of the critical inputs you need for your national innovation system and knowledge workers, also the innovation linkages, and of course the knowledge absorption. It's not just about creating the knowledge or pushing out the knowledge, but it's also ensuring that the knowledge is being absorbed. So we have the input sub-index made up of those 5 elements: institutions, human capital and research, infrastructure, market sophistication, and business sophistication. Then we have the output sub-index consisting of knowledge and technology output as well as creative output. You now have innovation efficiency index are still part of this GII, and I really, really love this. What the innovation efficiency index does essentially is to then measure, like I said, is built on an input-output framework, is to then measure the investments made in the input sub-index relative to the output or the results gotten from the output sub-index. In other words, it says, okay, we need to collect data, especially longitudinal data. Longitudinal data means over a period, to measure which of these inputs is having the most significant impact on the output. In other words, having invested knowledge, having invested education, having invested infrastructure, having invested business sophistication, it's important to measure to know what exactly is driving innovation, which includes absorptive capacity, which includes commercialization, which includes economic and social development. Remember, is to then go back and say which of these inputs is impacting the outcomes the most. That way, as a nation, you know what to focus on. You know what to scale up. You know what to expand. You know what to probably spend less resources on. There is a monitoring and evaluation imperative to identifying the drivers of innovation within your economies. It's extremely, extremely important. And this is the Global Innovation Index, remember, which Portugal decided to learn from and, leverage. Now, I need to say something here. We are going to wrap it up for this edition of this program for the sake of time, and we are going to continue on this same theme next week. We are still going to continue to look at identifying innovation drivers within your economies as a nation. You need to know what exactly is driving innovation, and we're going to continue to look at the sub-theme of monitoring and evaluation, right? The monitoring and evaluation imperative, because you need to be able to ask that question: which innovation inputs are most strongly correlated with innovation output? That way, you will be making optimal use of your innovation investment. I just gave an example of the GII, but I want to say something in closing. Last week, I mentioned the Nigerian digital economy strategy, which was developed, I think, under the outgone President Muhammadu Buhari. It was developed for, I think, 2020 to 2030. So the government of Nigeria, like we said last week, released the National Digital Economy Policy and Strategy for 2020 to 2030. Between last week and now, I've gone through that strategy, and I must be honest with you, it was interesting to know that the strategy, actually, the National Digital Economy Policy and Strategy 2020 to 2030, like I said last week, it has 8 pillars, but it was interesting to note that those 8 pillars has what you may call they had 3 sub-elements. Each of those pillars had 3 sub-elements. However, none of those sub-elements actually included the monitoring and evaluation elements. And that was interesting. Now, I need to say this. Somebody had also written, as I was doing my research ahead of today, I noticed that somebody had also written to, kind of flag the lack of the monitoring and evaluation elements. So each of those 8 pillars, interesting, had a policy objective, had sort of the requirements, what was needed. But it was interesting that even at the end of the document, there was nothing speaking to how it was going to be monitored and evaluated. They talked about the implementation strategies. So what happens after implementation? Are you not supposed to evaluate? The 8 pillars, like we said last week, are developmental regulation, digital literacy and skills, solid infrastructure, service infrastructure, digital services development and promotion, soft infrastructure, digital society and emerging technologies, and indigenous content development and adoption, which is nice. I like the pillar 8 because that kind of speaks to what I was suggesting about synchronizing entertainment, which is like our indigenous content, also with technology platforms. So I like pillar 8, but how do you measure? That was the visibly missing link. Otherwise, you don't know if it's working, you don't know what is working, you don't know which elements are working the most, you don't know what to amplify. So this is clearly missing. There was no monitoring evaluation framework or sub-framework within this strategy, right? Well, I think it's on this note that we are going to draw a curtain on today's edition of the program Developing National Innovation Systems for Absorptive Capacity. Remember, today we have been looking at identifying, the drivers of innovation within your economies. Very, very important. Understanding the drivers of innovation within your economies with the subtitle, the monitoring and evaluation imperative. Without monitoring and evaluating, you cannot know what exactly is working, why it is working, how it is working, what needs to be scaled, what needs to be scaled up, what needs to be expanded, what probably needs to be even if I may use that word, streamlined. If you're spending too much on things that are not producing, we need to streamline them or reduce them. But you wouldn't know all this except you have a framework like the GII, the Global Innovation Index, that identifies your inputs, identifies your outputs, and you now have the innovation efficiency index that is comparing what you're investing into innovation with what you are gaining from innovation, right? So that innovation efficiency index now helps you to measure what you're investing in terms of innovation output. It helps you to know which innovation outputs are more strongly correlated to innovation, which innovation inputs, beg your pardon, are more strongly correlated with innovation outputs. And then that way you can maximize your innovation investment as a nation. Thank you very much again for doing this with us. We look forward to hearing back from you. You are the reason why we do this. Please send us a mail at contact@theamogate.org. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube. We have rich content there. Like I said, we run this program from Monday through Friday. And remember, we are here to support you as a nation, support you as institutions, support you as organizations, as teams, even to support your individuals, your organizations. So we're very excellent at what we do in consulting, in even implementation, support, execution, enablement, and I can go on and on and on. Visit our website www.theamogate.org. You will see all that we have done. We've worked with supranationals, we've worked with large national organizations, we've worked outside of our home base in Nigeria, we've worked within Ethiopia, we've worked in organizations that also oversee intercontinental bodies like ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West Africa States, and so on and so forth. So we look forward to partnering with you, and you will see that these things we are saying, we are also capable of implementing. Thank you very much again for being with us today. My name remains Tolu Omadara. I'll be with you same time, same station next week. Until then, do not just think innovation, but also think monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.